Hey everyone, welcome to Frank Analysis. I am your host Franco, and today we are getting into the Tao of Systems Thinking, Chapter 6. I gave this book a review already when I covered Chapter 1, and this book can help you become a better thinker and to understand the world around you better. So again, that's the Tao of Systems Thinking by Michael McCurley, and let's get on with Chapter 6. So this chapter is called Understanding. Let's start with 46 here, passage 46. When we understand the world, we will live in harmony with our environment. But in a world without understanding, the earth's resources are consumed to build weapons of war. There's no greater calamity than not knowing the principle of enough, and no greater blessing than knowing that enough will enduringly last. 6.46 Tragedy of the Commons. We compete with one another for resources in this world we inhabit. For that reason, we consider material resources to be more important than they really are. Ironically, because some people want more than enough, there will never be enough for the rest of us. In any case, those who want more than others act as though there is never enough by taking more than others, thus creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by making resources scarcer and more costly for everyone else. Although this sounds like good economic sense, economics is nothing more than a set of symbolic system conventions that human beings have created, not the real nature of our world's resources and ecosystems. So that's something that we all got to remember, is that economics is a man-made thing. Motivation for this fallacy of human ego can be reduced to two basic maxims. I want more, and there is never enough. So those two basic maxims. I want more, and there is never enough. This produces infinite need or demand. This line of thinking produces what we've come to know as the tragedy of commons. Although those like ecologist Garrett Hardin have used contemporary terms, we have been aware of this for centuries. The problem is that those who are selfish have discovered effective ways of controlling what they take, by creating an illusion that other people must depend upon them in order to succeed or survive, rather than the actual resources required. This has the dual advantage of making those who grab more resources rich, while giving them rights to control resources that would otherwise belong to others. Those who no longer have resources must work for those who took them. And it's useless to debate whether people should actually control what they already possess. There are laws to protect ownership. A moot point, because we don't practice it, is that there would be resources for everyone if only we could understand and apply the principle of enough. When people consume and use resources like there's no tomorrow, it may be because they fear what they might lose. And what would people lose or gain if we learned to share more equitably? We don't know the answer because we've rarely tried to be less selfish or created political systems that are economically equitable. Since we have discovered economics from politics, when we try to combine them, the results have been disastrous. So it seems logical to let existing inequalities persist and adjust to them until we are forced to do otherwise. There's no greater calamity than not knowing when we have enough, and because of this, millions of people have been forced from their homes and been murdered or starved to death. This is the father of all wars. There's no greater malice than coveting the resources of others, when that leaves people without their rights to survive. Although we reassure ourselves that we're not responsible for the calamities that affect others, it would be naive not to recognize that we've been willing or passive accomplices of those who have enslaved or murdered people, no different from ourselves. We will only have enough when we completely understand that sufficiency really means for our species. That awareness hasn't been reached yet, as we are rapidly consuming fossil energy resources without taking fuller advantage of opportunities we have to create new infrastructures for renewable resources. We demonstrate that as long as we remain egotistical as individuals, we will not become self-sufficient as a species. So pretty much all these wars that we're having right now are all because of resources and because rich people want to gain more at the expense of the people that they're killing in these other countries and at the expense of people who are starving here domestically. 47. The wisdom of modeling systems allows us to know the affairs of this world without leaving our homes. We can know the behaviors of how things work without even glancing out our windows. A wise one knows without having to act through simulations. 6.47. Planning. Human beings, unlike other species, have learned to plan. We are able to take from imagination what's in our minds and convert this into reality. At the same time, some people are aware of negative impacts which will affect our future. Those who warn about the future are often not responded to favorably. And yet, we cannot anticipate future results with any reasonable accuracy unless we consider both the positive and negative feedbacks of our actions and behaviors. For future events, we have discovered a more exact language in mathematics. By careful study and observation, a few people, such as astronomers, can accurately predict cosmic events and model different types of dynamics. There are many types of modeling, some of which are more respected than others. Modeling exact events is highly valued because the measurements and mathematics of these are quite accurate. Modeling for system dynamics, which is related to systems thinking, often contains many variables used to show possible outcomes, but the dynamics for events may change before they occur. So variable outcomes are not easy to predict accurately. Modeling different scenarios, however, can be used to show outcomes people might prefer or want to avoid. These provide feedbacks which allow us to take actions that may change future events. Why should we examine outcomes we don't want? If modeling shows alternatives to make changes or improvements, we can take advantage of opportunities or awareness to avoid possible pitfalls. It isn't necessary to field test or try every option or error. Instead, we can model possibilities and eliminate non-viable options by simulating what's more likely to work. Then, we may discover why certain options work while others fail. In doing this doesn't require that we leave our homes or field test every alternative if mental rather than physical activity could help us to identify workable solutions. 48. Most learning consists of accumulating knowledge day by day. By using systems thinking, reduces it to simpler forms day by day. Ideally, the best model to follow is the simplest one, though that doesn't mean we'll be left with nothing to do. 6.48. The growth of knowledge. The problem with learning and all general knowledge is that it tends to multiply at an exponential rate. Our ability to process and retain information doesn't correlate to this. If we don't discriminate about what we learn, our brains will soon become overloaded with unessential information that blocks further input. We also forget and have natural internal programming to forget. This is an essential process as well. While it's important to process new information as we learn, we must also be prepared to reduce or discard unneeded information that isn't required. People who are aware of this, such as those who have studied the Tao or systems thinking, do not simply acquire more knowledge. They select and keep what is important and discard what is not. More than 2,000 years ago, followers of the Tao were aware of this and learned to reduce, select, or discard whatever knowledge that was unnecessary before the existence of personal computers and the internet. What they did probably make more sense now than it did before electronic computer technologies were introduced. While this may seem obvious today, it probably made less sense to people who were unaware that computers would be invented and we would be inundated with information. People now have to be selective about what they learn and eliminate whatever is unnecessary. Otherwise, they would be unable to find what they normally need, even for day-to-day activities. We need to find and keep what is essential. The rest is often unnecessary or unreliable. 49. Wise people realize that their interests lie in the interests of others. They are open-minded to new ideas like playful children. One who is wise is truly free to think about and recognize the truth. 6.49. Debating our use of a world model. During the 1970s, J.W. Forrester made a world system dynamics model and used it to warn of certain predicaments or issues mankind faced if people did not moderate their use of natural resources and share them more equitably. William D. Nordhaus, a well-known Yale scholar, criticized Forrester's model and warnings and claimed that these were inaccurate and incorrect. He further stated that there were no such real limits to resources. Time would test the works of both men. Forrester stated that if we do not moderate our use of this world's resources and find other alternatives, we will face serious consequences that could curb our growth and development as a species. Nordhaus contended that Forrester's methods used computer calculations and data estimations which were inaccurate and misleading. And he made several arguments intended to disprove what Forrester had said. Computer science was still in its infancy, and there were no personal computers at the time for people to confirm or check what the two had stated. Forrester, as a scientist, and Nordhaus, as a scholar, especially since they referred to future events. Had Forrester simply created a computer program to support what he warned us about, or was there validity to what he said? In summary, the arguments of both men are as follows. So number one, here we have J.W. Forrester created world computer simulation models to show the impact that growth and using resources would have upon our activities and the environment. He pointed out that there were limits to natural resource reserves, and we would suffer negative impacts on our species as a whole if we ignored or refused to take corrective actions and instead continued business as usual by exploiting resources that at exponential rates of growth. Number two, here we have William D. Nordhaus. Nordhaus criticized the modeling methods used by Forrester and pointed out that it's possible to create models that support nearly any point of view, thus rendering them unscientific and invalid. He also claimed that Forrester was simply restating an older argument from Thomas Malthus related to population growth and the food supply, which didn't take into account factors of human ingenuity and innovations that have helped us to solve similar problems in the past. The results after several decades are interesting. Both men were right to a certain extent, but the future was different in ways that were difficult for them to anticipate as well. Number one, it would be unlikely for us as a species to accept collapse without doing anything about it. Nordhaus. We have historically adapted before. Number two, innovations in technology might be possible, but social and political will to implement major changes would be unlikely or difficult to achieve. Forrester. Events that went beyond expectations. Mainframe computers were replaced by personal computers, so it became easier to check system dynamics models than Nordhaus anticipated. Besides this, Forrester had provided multiple scenarios, and simulation models would evolve and be improved over the years that followed. Today, people can check models with personal computers themselves, but 40 to 50 years ago, only a few mainframe computers were available. Using mathematics provides a language that people can replicate, work with, and verify. New technologies for processing petroleum and unexpected discoveries of natural gas and other resources went beyond the conventional energy scarcity scenarios anticipated by Forrester, which fueled new expectations for growth or recovery, with mixed results. Predictions which were accurate. Concerns about absorption, limits for anthropogenic products such as carbon dioxide, CFCs, which are chlorofluorocarbons, toxic metals, and other contaminants have demonstrated negative measurable global impacts on arable land, agriculture, health, water aquifers, and species of other living organisms. Many of the results simulated in the world models from 40 years ago have been confirmed and observed, although not always in ways which were expected. The possibility that people wouldn't take major steps needed to respond and implement major changes was also considered, and this is where we find ourselves today. Inaction has been the easiest alternative, although there have been limited attempts to reduce the impacts of our actions on the global environment. Conclusion. There have been interesting changes in technology and human awareness which have set the world stage for future developments. So to paraphrase what one prominent American has stated, never waste a good crisis as an opportunity for change. We have begun to witness a series of crises, which may give us the opportunities we need. But will we improve by taking advantage of them? Paraphrased quote by Rahm Emanuel in Crisis Opportunity for Obama. 50. Life and death have multiple companions. Those who contemplate or fear death will have a lot of company, but that's because they are struggling for life. And yet there are some who pass through great difficulties almost effortlessly untouched. That is because they allow for nothing else than life. 6.50 Live or let die. Although we may not notice, we make choices between life and death every day. We can choose how we respond to every situation, and in most of these, there are choices we can make for life or death. Creative choices are companions of life. Destructive choices are companions of death, and entropy is the end of everything in frozen stasis or heat death. Our response is important because we're well aware of what the end will be for us as individuals. So in simple terms, how we live is what matters if death is a foregone conclusion. Why are some so vibrant and full of life, while others struggling with living? Those who live fully accept nothing less than life, and those who experience the opposite are obsessed in some way with death. Living requires the fusion of creative energy. Death releases the fission of destructive energy. But creation can also be a synergy of creative destruction in which what's new replaces previously existing counterparts. These aren't really positive or negative, though people may interpret them in simplistic terms. It is an idealistic fantasy to say that life is the ultimate goal for everyone. Some find a dark, gothic comfort in death as the ultimate form of repose or revenge, since no one can persecute anyone from beyond the grave. But then religion steps in to rectify that with an afterlife. Suicide bombers and other terrorists have lost or obliterated any joy left in themselves for living, to the point that they're willing to sacrifice life by making a statement in committing suicide or killing other human beings. Then there are also natural disasters which occur unexpectedly without any human intervention. And of course, other disasters which are combinations of both. These challenge our understandings of behaviors for natural and human system dynamics. And thus we find people who prefer death, those who have lost much or have nothing more to lose, people who are sick, those who are old, those who are too poor, people who are heartbroken, those who have broken spirits, those who are in pain, people who cannot bear what they know, those who are hopelessly addicted, those who are alone, people who are destitute, those who cannot live with hurt, those who hate and destroy others, people who have destroyed themselves. So we also find people who prefer life, people who have recovered, those who are renewed, those who have enough, people who find hope, those who have faith, those who overcome pain, people who are wise, those who have no further needs, those who find companionship, people who are generous, those who learn from their mistakes, those who love, people who create. Those who prefer life must face the same challenges, but they move forward with hope that life will renew their spirits so they may somehow persevere. Isn't it time for terrorists and suicide attackers to come in from the cold and modify their conduct to choose life? There's a certain cognitive dissonance that allows people to combine prayer and murder other people or murder other human beings. That same dissonance allows highly disciplined scientists and soldiers to wage war against our own species. How can issues like this ever be resolved? People will only change when they become aware of the dissonance. No religion has the ultimate answer unless it shows all of us how to live. No economic system has developed any real practice for equitable distribution. Technological development hasn't given viable options for everyone, since it has also been employed to create weapons for destroying part of our own species. Nor do political or economic systems work by excluding people from the natural resources the world has to offer. No system should have a monopoly over how people think and feel. We know that nearly all social systems fall short of their goals when people are manipulative and act selfishly. In our hearts and minds, we know that the social systems will fail unless they provide a focus on life for everyone. To answer a previous question, improving is choosing life, although there's also creative destruction. Now we get to passage 51. All that exists, all that is animate and inanimate, owes its existence to the source, and that's written with a capital S, source. So the author is implying source is, you can call it the universe, you can call it the infinite, you could call it the nothing, all of that with a capital first letter, or you can call it God. All of that points to pretty much the same thing in all these ancient spiritual scriptures. But here what the Tao Te Ching is referring to, this infinity, this universe, this God, it's calling it source with a capital S. All right, so all that exists, all that is animate and inanimate, owes its existence to the source, which helps to nurture, sustain, protect, motivate, feed, and cover under its protection. All these systems harmonize spontaneously. 6.51 Questioning the source. The source of all we know that exists is our world, and on a large scale, the universe. Everything that is animate comes from what is inanimate. Matter is interrelated to energy, as space is to time. These relations arise spontaneously among all systems. There is no need for human oversight of natural processes, and any attempts to artificially manipulate natural systems usually have undesirable outcomes. The laws of the universe have nothing to do with beliefs or social systems. Living ecosystems have developed over millions of years, independent of human contact or intervention until recent history. Although we have been around a relatively short period of time in geological terms, we've assured ourselves that we're the main protagonists in the story of our planet, mainly because we're the only ones who are writing the story. As the heroes of our story, we expect triumph over nature instead of learning from it. In consequence, we fight amongst one another when it would have been better to share. We discover difficult ways to do things instead of looking for easier ones. We compete for more of the best, even if it means leaving others with nothing. So, by becoming selfish, we never learn what would have been better for us and are somehow proud of it. Now we get to passage 52. The mother of all things is our common origin. Knowing our mother with a capital M, so this is synonymous with what was referred to as source with a capital S, synonymous with infinity, God, universe. We will come to know her other children, how all cycles open and close, begin and end. We can discover an inner vision of even her smallest system through the eyes of a child. 6.52 Global Impacts. It is interesting that we want to dominate our natural world and enjoy all her benefits without any guilt or consequences. no matter how destructive, selfish, or violent we may be. If Gaia were a woman, we would be accused of rape, for we have certainly violated our trust as the privileged species who inhabits this world, but have ravished her for personal pleasure without giving anything back. People at times make empty arguments to justify the unjustifiable. So we hear things from sex offenders like, she wanted it. She's just a slut. She deserved what she got. She tempted me. Such excuses are used to cover reprehensible behaviors for assault, sexual chauvinism, and abuse. Sexual offenders, even in our permissive societies, are dealt with harshly. Why are we not more considerate of what we do to the world we live in? Let's examine whether or not we have anything to do with this planet we inhabit. If we cannot treat our own species with equitable respect and consideration, what can be expected for the rest of the species who share this world with us? Consider for a moment that men at different times are intentionally creative or destructive. Enthusiasm varies from moment to moment for each. People produce entropy and contamination from all of their activities, whether they are intended or not. Mental and physical contamination from those activities accumulates in our environment, which is inhabited by all the species of this planet. In previous centuries, people were limited to exploiting their immediate environment on the habitable land masses of our planet, which comprised about 30% of its surface area. Forests were exploited for timber and fuel and wood-based energy economies, before coal became a substitute for wood, as forest and readily available supplies of wood became scarcer. Burning wood and then coal as raw materials from forests ran out, and more recently, petroleum derivatives and natural gas have all produced large quantities of gaseous byproducts, which are greater in volume and weight than the fossil fuels we burn, since these combine with oxygen when they are burned to produce carbon dioxide principally, and other byproducts. All of this has been added to our atmosphere for hundreds of years. Although part of what we produce is reabsorbed, the proportional mixture of gases is in our atmosphere, or the proportional mixture of gases in our atmosphere is changing. It's also notable that a portion of the carbon dioxide we expected to turn up in our atmosphere has turned up in our planet's oceans instead, and these are becoming more acidic. Why is this important? The sun is a primary energy source for this planet, not fossil fuels. The average worldwide median temperature for the atmosphere depends upon a relative mix of gases that retain a certain amount of heat from the sun, allow sunlight to reach the plant vegetation for photosynthesis that produces food sources and oxygen for living organisms, and radiates excess heat back into space in ways that prevent the atmosphere from overheating, which would threaten most life forms. What happens if we disturb that balance? Or what might also happen through global contamination of the world's oceans? These questions are debatable as long as it is unclear that we are causing the damage. However, it's unlikely we could undo what has already been done, especially if the impact of human activity still increases. We have been dumping millions of tons of waste into the atmosphere on a daily basis for the past century, starting with burning wood as our primary fuel hundreds of years ago. Do we really think we can do this without causing any consequences to our climate or environment? While we pretend that what we do has no effect on global systems because it's convenient to believe that we're beginning to note measurable annual increases in carbon dioxide and elevated temperatures in locations around the world, while seasonal changes and weather events are beginning to produce unexpected results. And what about our impact on other living species? Should we be concerned? Climate change skeptics say no. There are no real lasting effects from our activities on the overall global system. Other environmentalists warn that we have already surpassed saturation points for normal balances and elimination of contamination, which will lead to greater weather and climate events with negative or unpredictable consequences. To imagine we aren't changing anything globally is wishful thinking, not scientific fact. Political expedience has also blocked meaningful or significant changes to energy legislation because we're addicted to the energy sources we already consume. So far, the author has focused a lot on climate change, but climate change isn't the only type of environmental destruction that humans are causing. Right? There's poisons that we're letting out. We're poisoning the land. And a lot of that poison that we let off into the land, like letting out certain heavy metals or other pollutants that are used during industrialization, it gets absorbed by plants, it gets absorbed by animals, and ultimately we as humans absorb that. And then big pharma profits off of that. So all these major industries, right? The fossil fuel industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, because they're putting some of this stuff in there, they are all benefiting from each other. In a movie, all of these would be excellent ingredients for a perfect storm. The players are present and the stage is set. All we need is the director's signal for the crises on a larger scale. The fact we don't see immediate global consequences doesn't mean we aren't about to see them. Keep in mind that geological timescales are quite different than human ones. Minutes, hours, days, weeks, or years, these are human time frames. Decades, centuries, and ages are more in line for geological change. If we modify global parameters without realizing what we are doing, we will be unable to change them back later, even when we want to. Once the fossil fuel age ends, there's no return. But that's not all we have to face. Another question is, are we ready for a transition to a renewable energy economy? We need to take advantage and use some of our fossil fuel resources to leverage the shift to other alternative energy resources before most fossil fuel resources are exhausted. Will we respond in time or react at the last moment? This seems doable on paper until we try to put it into practice. For people who like drama with special movie effects, the general consensus seems to be, we'll respond at the last moment. Passage 53. One who possesses the smallest grain of wisdom will follow the system's thinking way, the Tao, and not depart from it. This way is level and straight, though many prefer more tortuous paths. People seem to know much about the ways of the world, but what do they know of the universe? And that's written with a capital U, universe, right? Again, synonymous with infinity, synonymous with source, synonymous with what was earlier written, mother with a capital M, which is where we all come from. Everything that's animate and inanimate. 6.53, what we follow. What most people follow is self-interest. While this makes sense for most species, it doesn't always make sense as an intelligent, well-considered choice for rational human beings who live and must share resources in a global society. Self-interest is a fundamental basis for capitalism. Supposedly, if we were all able to freely pursue self-interest to the fullest, all the blessings of our kingdoms would flow abundantly, and we would be better off than we are now. While there's a grain of truth to this, it has nothing to do with people following self-interest to the maximum. Uncontrolled self-interest produces a tragedy of commons instead. Even a small amount of common sense shows this. We won't have enough if some people are uncontrollably selfish in a limited resource environment, no matter how nice being rich may be for those who get the chance. While a few become rich, a much higher number of people become poor. And too many of these who have suffered from extreme hunger, sickness, and poverty have died. Since this situation has existed for centuries, it's relatively easy to fault victims somehow for their own afflictions. Self-interest is a simple euphemism for selfishness, which is at the heart of capitalist systems, but never absent in socialist systems either. Self-interest shouldn't be confused with self-reliance, however, since the second term implies that people can think for themselves. Selfishness is usually blind to everything else. Self-reliance is more practical in terms of awareness. The system way, shown to us by the Tao, is simpler than most explanations. It has fewer twists and turns, and is less tortuous than other methods. Of course, it doesn't offer easy riches, high profits, or investment returns, since it focuses on underlying causes for things which happen around us. Once we understand these, we'll have better ideas for how things work. People may have extensive knowledge of the ways of the world, but what do they really understand? What they think cannot compare to a greater understanding of the universe. Now here we're at with the last passage for this chapter, 54. Passage 54, cultivated systems have roots which run deep. What you cultivate in yourself remains inside of you. If you cultivate a family, it becomes a permanent extension. If you cultivate a community, it lives and grows. If you cultivate a state, it will flower and bloom. If you cultivate a world, it will become universal. And yet you'll find all of this within you. 6.54, what we cultivate. What we build or cultivate comes from who we are and how we think. What we build and cultivate also determines how we think. This circular or cyclical process may allow us to concentrate on what is immediately important, but it's not so effective in other ways for the same reason. When we concentrate on immediate concerns, we'll miss the consequences we must face at some point later on. If we cultivate a family, our thoughts, efforts, and beliefs will be focused on that. If we're active in our communities, then our actions and efforts will move in that direction. If we go into politics, we'll direct our thoughts and actions along political action lines of a state. Each of these moves are thinking and actions in different directions, but these are related to outcomes which create exclusive perceptions and ways of thinking. Thus, we have different mindsets and paradigms all over the world, but people don't realize that while mindsets may seem quite different, basic human behaviors are still fundamentally the same, and the types of mindsets people have influence their behavior in divergent ways. Cultivating the world is the challenge we have that remains. That challenge goes far beyond our normal concepts of family, community, or state. It goes beyond ourselves as individuals to who we are as a species. People won't see what they don't recognize. That is why the ideas of some thinkers speak loudly to the people of their time. But not so much when the perceptions of people change. While the ideas of other thinkers, if spoken at all, were spoken of quietly because they were not in harmony with popular opinion. Some ideas have grown stronger and become more clearly understood over time, as perceptions of people change. This is because certain ideas are timeless. These ideas may not always be understood clearly from the beginning, but since they never change over time, they become understood later when we are ready for them. Temporal ideas and fads are superseded through experience and time. These are part of the din and the roar, the excitement of the moment. Once they pass, the quiet and unobtrusive ideas are the ones that remain. A systems thinker doesn't need to leave his house or collect extensive field ideas to cultivate an inner awareness that goes beyond external perceptions. So instead of focusing on immediate perceptions, which are distractions people are busy cultivating, this thinker develops an awareness to see beyond temporal manifestations into the essential elements of everything else. This universal awareness won't change because it's timeless and waits for the moment when the rest of us will notice it. So it's pretty much saying that eventually, as time passes on, people will notice the objective, and eventually people will be on the same page because we will all come to realize the same thing. So that does it for that chapter. That was chapter 6. Game.film. I really appreciate that you like these book reviews and readings. Chase Palm says, too bad no CEO, no political leaders read this book. You don't know that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the point of trying to raise self-awareness is that most likely, I think that people who are really rich and people who are CEOs, people who are billionaires, people who can control everything, people who are at the top, they're the most likely going to be the last ones to become really self-aware. The point is to raise awareness in your community, among other people who are of a similar class as you, so that we can all start pointing things out to each other, so that more and more of us can become aware, and then we can put pressure on people who are at the top in terms of financial status, so that their ways can change. Right? It's going to be a domino effect. What's up, Extra Bulla? It's good to see you. Said, sup, fam. I'll go on your show eventually at some point. I'm looking forward to that. All right, every time I go on, I have a good time. It's just that right now I'm taking a bit of a break from some political commentary stuff. Game.film. Shout out to you. Steve Breedlove. Shout out to you as well. Said, I wish a third of lefty YouTube commentators took half a day to understand how to think in systems. Yes, absolutely, because a lot of them are really just focused on the day-to-day. They're focused on the topic of the day or the topic of the week, and then they just get distracted by that, and then they're like waiting for the next topic of the day so that they can get more clicks and views. And then they become so invested in trying to prove their point, so invested in getting into arguments with other people and calling out other people, and then that's how you get all these drama videos. It's people that are focusing on such myopic things, that are just so focused on the smaller picture instead of taking the time to step back and looking at the bigger picture and noticing some flaws that they may have, noticing things that are more important, and seeing things more clearly, rather than just thinking about what their tribe wants them to think. Because that is something I've been seeing a lot in independent or alt media, is there's so much tribalism right now, and people don't even realize that they're being tribal. But yeah, hopefully people can step back. Whatever's happening in their life, I hope something can lead them to take that step back and to analyze themselves and to see the world more clearly, to think in systems, like you said, Steve. But yeah, that does it for chapter 6. I'll see you guys for chapter 7. Take care, and as always, guys, stay informed.